Okay, so in today's video, I want to walk you through the only sales pitch that you really need to know in order to start closing larger and larger deals. This is the same pitch that I use week in, week out. It's helped me close seven-figure deals as well as high six-figure deals for my software sales role, as well as this is the same framework I've used for my consulting business to close my first initial clients. So if you're a founder or a software sales rep, you're definitely going to stick around. It's a very easy to replicate process. It's 8 steps, and I'll actually leave the templates that I use day in, day out in the description below so you can take them and use them and hopefully. Now, the goal of my framework is to get the sale while overcoming the least number of objections possible. And so before we tackle that issue and really dive into the framework, I want to take a quick step back and actually talk about how to prepare for these pitch meetings, how to prepare for these proposal review meetings. Because one of the biggest mistakes I see entrepreneurs and junior sales reps make is they go into these discussions prepared, but they kind of wing it on what they actually need to get out of those calls. Everyone wants to close a deal. Like everyone knows, like, yes, we're going in to try to close a deal, but it's really important to understand, like, what are the key things that you need to get out of this particular call or proposal review in order to actually get the sale and actually make sure you can forecast when you get the sale accordingly. I had a golf coach growing up. My golf coach used to tell me, like, hey, whenever you go up to the tee, only think of 3 things at that time. Because if you think of way more than that, then you're gonna be, overthinking it, and you're gonna like screw up your swing. And so that's how I approach, whenever I go into these proposal reviews, I try to have 3 main objectives. So what I recommend you do is spend maybe like 15 minutes before this meeting and really write out, like, what do you need to get out of the call. What I would recommend, just from my experience, is a couple things as far as what your objective should be. One, get alignment on price, right? You want to walk out of that discussion with a full understanding of, like, are we aligned on what you're purchasing and at what price point? The second thing is get alignment on the date that we can complete the contract. So you need to get a date. And then the third piece is get alignment on where the customer is at in their adoption journey. Like, all companies buy software, buy services differently. So understand what their buying process looks like. And then based on what your sales process looks like, you want to kind of find that delta and match it and understand, like, okay, what are the steps we need to take from today to get you to a signed contract, to get you onboarded or start delivering the work. And you want to have those 3 as the main objectives is what I recommend, because then you can come out of that call with a clear roadmap on how do we close this deal. Okay, so now you have your objectives written on paper. Let's actually dive into how you're going to deliver the perfect pitch. Let's start with step 1. Step 1 is introductions and agenda setting. This is an extremely important step because if you are going to be selling into larger companies, there's a very good chance that you're going to be meeting people for the first time during that proposal review meeting. So what you want to do is, if you're walking into a meeting or a call or any room where you haven't met everyone in that room already, you want to pause and take 2 to 3 minutes to let everyone from your prospects team introduce themselves and then share a little more about their role and maybe if they have any experience with your product or service. What this will allow you to do is make a mental note and determine, like, hey, that's the CEO, that person's in security, this person's their CTO. And then as you go through the pitch, you can start mapping things that might be relevant to their job back to them. So you're sort of already handling any sort of objections and kind of selling specifically to their role. So that's why you want to start with introductions. If you're showing up to a meeting with, your team, make sure your team gets introduced to, get them talking with your prospects team as well. So the introductions, and as part of the introductions, you want to set the agenda and primarily the engagement model for the meeting. And so what I mean by that is, if you go into a meeting or a room and you just start pitching and saying, like, hey, this is how much this costs, this is what we can do for you, do you guys want to buy? And your prospect is not expecting you to pitch to them, that is misalignment on what the expectations of that meeting is, and you're going to get blown out of the water and asked to leave, or they're just going to give you deaf ears. So you're just a waste of everyone's time. So what you want to do at the start of the meeting is set the objective in the engagement model and say, hey, for the objective for today, we've been working with the team and we've identified a few key challenges. This is where our solution can add value. So we want to come out of this meeting today with a clear understanding of, like, how do we define and really formalize our partnership between our 2 companies. And to get there, we'll review the problems that we're trying to solve for, the objectives, how our solution can help, and then what pricing and commercials look like. And that's how you set the engagement model and also go through the agenda for the meeting. And then you stop after you say all that. You say like, hey, does that sound good? Is there anything else that you want to discuss and get out of today's meeting? And you kind of pass it back to them. And if they do have things they want to talk, so here is an example of an agenda slide that I use day in, day out. So it just goes through, hey, this is the content that we'll be covering over this presentation. During this slide is when I usually ask around the engagement model, around objectives for the meeting, and get the customer's buy-in of like, hey, let's cover this content, and come after we cover the content, let's go after these objectives, which is really like, how do we get the sale? So yeah, feel free to swipe. Okay, so now that you've set the engagement model and you've given yourself the right to continue your pitch, the first thing you want to highlight, which is going to be step 2, is why change the approach, and really an our understanding slide of the prospect. The reason you do this is your biggest competitor in most deals is always going to be status quo. So the goal of the our understanding slide is to showcase to the prospect that, hey, if you don't do anything, this is how much revenue it's going to cost you, this is how much time it's going to cost your team, market share, and if you don't solve this by this date, this is the issue that's going to have on your business overall. So the goal of this slide is to share like, hey, I've been working with your team, we've been listening to you during these meetings, and these are the problems that we've identified as key problems for you to solve and for you to fund to solve, right? To pay money to solve. And this. Okay, so here's a good example of an our understanding, or what I like to call change our approach slide. So here we have an example of a potential client for AccuSales. They talk about needing to consistently hit their revenue forecast quarter over quarter. So they had challenges with pipeline coverage, which has led to them missing the last 2 quarters. So 1.2 million each quarter. And then at the current trajectory, if they don't do anything, they're going to miss their yearly forecast. They also have an AE team, and only 2 out of 5 of the AEs have actually consistently hit their quarterly targets. All their prospecting is done through events primarily to generate leads. So they don't have a lot of confidence that what they're doing today is going to increase their pipeline coverage and eventually hit their yearly sales forecast. On top of that, we also talked about, their difficulty in hiring and onboarding SDRs. It takes them almost 6 months to ramp to be effective from their experience, and they don't want to invest in the tools and training, which roughly costs about $10,000 per head during the ramp phase alone. So, okay, so a few pro tips on the our understanding slide. First, if you're selling to like a larger company and there's someone at that company that's a sales champion, right? Like they want to buy your product and they need to pitch your product internally to like the CEO or their boss. Work with that person and capture the challenges and pains and really the quantification of doing nothing in the customer's language. And so what I mean by that, right, is I'm selling to like marketing leaders or sales leaders. You might say something like, hey, if we don't solve these challenges with churn, we're expected to, lose 30% of our customer base and reduce like net dollar retention by 50% into this next year. Those are like insanely fantastical numbers, right? If you're doing that, you're probably going to be out of business in like 2 to 3 years. But the idea is that you want to capture the pains and the quantification of the pains in metrics that matter to the customer and in the customer's words. The reason you do that is it's a lot harder for them to, what's the word I'm looking for? Like to object to internal language and having an internal advocate. Now, to piggyback off that, work with the person to actually get these slides built out or get the content for this. And then if that champion is in the room, you and him could potentially, or her, could co-present the our understanding slide back to the rest of the team as a way to say like, hey, we worked with, John over in finance. We really determined like, hey, these are the real problems that we want to solve for. The reason you want to do that is it's a lot harder for a CEO of a company to shit on his own employees. Okay, so now that you dragged your prospect through the pain in step 2, step 3, you're going to talk about the benefits and their goals. And these aren't your goals, right? These are goals for the customer, right? Your goals are to close a deal by this date at this price point. For the customer, what you want to sell on this slide is the art of the possible if they can solve the challenges that you mentioned in step 2. So here you want to talk about things like new revenue opportunities, improved customer retention, market share, expansion to new markets. All of the things are going to be super relevant. One of the pro tips that I want to give you is as you're like writing this slide or like thinking about this slide, think about it from the point of view of what your customer's CEO would want to brag about to his peers, his investors, even on the news, right? So think about words like, reducing operational expenses, increasing top line revenue, increasing net margin, increasing market share, launching new products. having higher retention. All these things are things that are CEO or executive level visibility goals and objectives. And so you want to tie that, hey, in step 2, you talked about, hey, this is the issues that you're running into that's costing you guys a ton of money, a ton of time. Here's the art of the possible if you solve these challenges. And these benefits are going to help you not even at like a team level or like a lower like day-to-day level. This is going to help you actually expand your business.
So here's a good example of an hour objective slide. So this is where if your prospect solves for the challenges they have today, what's the positive benefits to their business? And this is expressed in quantified business metrics. And so for this example, right, if they increase their pipeline coverage to 4x, their forecast date 100% of their revenue forecast, they're going to reduce the variance in their quarterly forecast. This is a big issue for a lot of sales teams where, their sales team will forecast, a million and then they'll hit 500,000. So how do you reduce that variance in forecast? And then ideally close 8 new logos. So really increasing the number of new customers they're bringing in this year. So that's on one piece. And then the other one is continuing to improve team efficiency. So being able to decrease the cost of, headcount, cost avoidance of headcount, which really means like how can we continue to hit our revenue number without having to hire too many people. So we can forecast that to be about 3 SDRs, and then reducing the time to be productive from 6 months to 3 months into the future if they do want to scale out their sales team. Now, the thing to call out here is think about like how these benefits are expressed, right? They're expressed in very high level business metrics that CEOs and CFOs would like to care about. So it's talking about, revenue forecast for the fiscal year, forecast variance, decreasing operational cost on tools, cost avoidance, reducing headcount budget. These are all things that execs care about. So whenever you're writing the slide, think about it.
Okay, so let's pause for a second and think about what we've done so far in our pitch. We've introduced ourselves, we've set the engagement model, we've asked for the right to pitch to our customer, and then we've dragged them through some of the pains in their own language so they can really empathize and relive some of the challenges they're seeing today. And then we've painted the future state, right? Like the ideal promised land of how if we can solve some of these challenges today, not only are they going to be living way better, but here's some of the quantified benefits of that promised land, hopefully that are even more than just solving for some of the losses they're experiencing today. So we're right here. So we've got 2 variables that we've sort of presented to our prospect, the current state and then the future state. What we need to do now in step 4 is to actually bridge that and show them how do we get them from their current state to their future state, and how do we help them get there. And usually this is where our product comes. Okay, so let's pause for a second and think about what we've done so far in our pitch. We've introduced ourselves, we've set the engagement model, we've asked for the right to pitch to our customer, and then we've dragged them through some of the pains in their own language so they can really empathize and relive some of the challenges they're seeing today. And then we've painted the future state, right? Like the ideal promised land of how if we can solve some of these challenges today, not only are they going to be living way better, but here's some of the quantified benefits of that promised land, hopefully that are even more than just solving for some of the losses they're experiencing today. So we're right here. So we've got 2 variables that we've sort of presented to our prospect, the current state and then the future state. What we need to do now in step 4 is to actually bridge that and show them how do we get them from their current state to their future state, and how do we help them get there. And usually this is where our product comes in. Now, this is a very unique step because it's extremely dependent on the product or service that you're selling, right? And so when you have someone with a current state pain and they're looking at these future state goals, right, you want to be sure that your product or service is that bridge between where they are today and where they're trying to get to. So if you are selling an extremely simple product or an extremely simple service, right, this could be something, like, hey, we're going to like mow your lawn. I'm just giving an example. That's the first thing that came to mind. But the idea there is like it's not super complicated, right? So if you're doing a service like that, or if you're selling some very, very simple software that does one specific thing, like for example, like, it converts, a Word document to a PDF, something like that. What you can do is you can actually say very upfront, like, hey, this is how we would help. These are some of the critical features that are most relevant to you. So it can be things like using the example of the export product. You can say like, hey, it'll take us 10 seconds to be able to convert a Word doc to a PDF. Then you can export it. You can share it with your team. Just share some of the features that are important. Now, if you're on the other side of the spectrum and you're selling an extremely complex platform, right? And when I say platform, I mean some sort of software platform that solves a bunch of different use cases. So things like Salesforce, right? Like a marketing team, finance team, sales team, customer support team, all of them can use Salesforce, right? But they use different modules within Salesforce. So that's what I mean when I say platform. Or if you're selling an extremely complex like consulting engagement where there's like multiple different milestones and you got to you have a bunch of deliverables that you have to give to the customer, what I would recommend during step 4 is to build out a maturity path and talk through that maturity path when you're going through your pitch. So what I mean by maturity path is when someone buys a platform or signs up for a large consulting engagement, it's not like the second they sign, the next day they're onboarded or the next day they're going to start seeing results, right? It's a maturity path. And so what you want to do is start building out a few slides and say like, hey, in phase 1, after you buy our product or service, in phase 1, these are the challenges we're going to solve for. This is the benefit you're going to see and the value you're going to see. And these are some of the critical features that we're going to implement and you're going to adopt in phase 1. And so that's for phase 1. Then in phase 2, you're going to say, these are some of the challenges we're going to solve in phase 2. These are the value and benefits you're going to see in phase 2. And these are some of the additional features that you're going to be adopting in our platform. Similarly, with a consulting engagement, you can say like, hey, in phase 1, these are some of the challenges we're going to solve for. This is the deliverables that we're going to give back to your team. And this is the outcomes you're going to see as a result of that. And then phase 2 and then phase 3. The reason you do it this way, especially for more complex products and services, is no one likes buying something and then seeing an ROI on it 3 years later. They want to see the iterative value that they're going to be receiving after they make a purchase. So this is a really good way to kind of paint the picture of, hey, you're stuck in a very kind of shitty like current state and you're trying to get to the promised land. Here's the phases that we recommend that you implement our product or service and how you're going to continue to see value as you get from point A to point B. And for bigger companies, like that could be 3 to 5 years of this project, right? And so that's why you want to pitch them a maturity path, because it shows that they're going to get value in all these different phases and solve challenges along the way. So they don't have to write, Now, here's a quick pro tip for step 4. Now, this is a very complex step, but I think it's extremely important because what you're doing during this part of the pitch is you're actually de-risking the project, right? Because if you can come in and say like, hey, we understand why you're struggling and some of the struggles that you're running into and the implications of them. We understand where you're trying to get to. And if you get there, these are the benefits you're going to see. We're going to give you a path that is the least risky path so that you're going to see value throughout that entire engagement model. And so that is what we're trying to do in step 4. One of the things that I would recommend you include here is some sort of TCO analysis. And this can be even if you sell like kind of a simple like product, or if you're selling like one of these platform or these like multi-year like consulting engagements. So I would recommend here, do a TCO analysis. I don't really have time to maybe go super into it in this video, but you can Google something called a DCF model in Excel, and that'll give you all the inputs you need to actually build that TCO. So it's called discounted cash flow. Most companies use that to evaluate projects, but this is a good like kind of part in your pitch or your proposal.
Okay, let's dive into 2 real-world examples for step 4. The first one I'm going to give you is a much more straightforward product or service example on how to really talk about your approach and really how you're going to help your customer bridge the gap between their current state challenges and their future state goals and objectives. So this is for AccuSales. So AccuSales is a sales consulting agency. And when I typically pitch this slide, I walk through each of the different pieces and what we do in our 7-step process and really what the value to the customer is. So here, we talk about like strategy development, working on maybe building out their first, pipeline generation campaigns, qualifying opportunities in step 3, closing some initial deals for our customers, optimization and scaling, which is really, we're reviewing what works and then figuring out how do we optimize a sales funnel to maximize conversions. And then if the customer wants to bring sales in-house, we work with them on taking the proven playbook and then, hiring and scaling and ramping their in-house sales team. So eventually we do offboard when the customer wants to bring everything in-house. So when I typically, go through this slide, I'll pause at certain parts of it. So like qualified opportunities, I'll pause there and really talk about, as, we start, generating pipeline for you, we'll qualify the opportunities. You should see an increase in qualified pipeline And that will ensure that you start hitting your revenue forecast quarter over quarter much more consistently. So that's what we do in step 3 and why it matters to the customer. Similarly with, step 4, we'll start closing the initial deals after we qualify the opportunities. So you don't have to worry or spend any time having to worry about sales at all. And then after we do that, we actually start documenting everything in step 5, figuring out what works, what doesn't, build a sales playbook specifically for your product. And then if that sales playbook is scalable and you want to start looking at bringing your sales team in-house, we'll work with you on hiring and sourcing candidates, ramping those candidates when they get hired. And then eventually you have an in-house sales team that has a proven playbook that they can come in and execute on from day one. And so that's how we talk about, AccuSales and the different steps in our process and the value and why. Now, I want to transition to a real world example of a very complex software platform deal I did last year. And how, when I talked about multi-step or multi-phase projects, either consulting engagements or software deals, how to really talk through the value of that approach. And so here, this was a data platform I was selling, and the customer had some issues with access to data. So these challenges are from the our understanding slide in step 2. And then this is how they're actually approaching, delivering data to their internal users today. So this is their approach today, and then these are the challenges related to that approach. So in phase 1, and really how you want to pitch this is our recommended approach in phase 1. As part of our platform, these are the features you're going to be adopting in phase 1 that we're going to help you implement. And as a result of using those features, this is what happens, right? We reduce some of the data replication from data marts. And as a result of that, we're actually able to reduce your total cost of ownership of the platform and make your engineering team way more efficient. So that's for phase 1. And then in phase 2, what we talk about is, you're going to be adopting this strategy and this approach to your data warehousing strategy. And as a result of that, within our platform, you're going to be adopting new features, and those new features are going to continue to reduce the data copying as it relates to ETL processes. And as a result of that, you're going to actually eliminate all the software costs related to some data warehousing technologies that you're using today. And so the key thing here and kind of the framework is talk about the features that you're going to be adopting in each of the phases, what that feature allows them to do, and as a result of doing that, what's the key result within their business, right? Lower cost, increased, developer velocity, increased revenue, not having to hire more engineers. These are all things that you can talk about when it comes to the key result. Now, as a part of this, right, is for these multi-step, multi-phase projects. This project was actually a 5-year project. If you can, I would recommend building out some sort of TCO analysis. So this is the actual TCO analysis we did for this customer. It was a 5-year project. It's a 5-year TCO. And really what it shows is this is their current approach if they do absolutely nothing and they continue to grow at the forecast that they're slated to grow for over the next 5 years, costs about $4 million. If they switch over to our approach, this is how much it'll cost at the end of 5 years, which is about $2.5 million. So they're actually able to see the savings year over year, with the total being $1.6 million in savings, so about 40% reduction in TCO. The reason you want to do a year over year cash flow statement, or cash outflow, is to show, this customer is different because we could show a ROI in year 1, but a lot of times when you sell very complex products or projects, you're not going to be able to show an ROI in year 1. And so you want to show when that payback period will be, where your approach will actually be more cost efficient than their current approach. So that's what you want to do year over year. This one was a little bit more straightforward because we could save them a ton of money in year 1. But a lot of times you might only see, they might only start seeing their savings in 18 months in or 24 months in. So I would highly recommend doing a TCO analysis when you're trying to sell, multi-step or multi-phase, extremely complex software platform.
Okay, so if you made it this far, right, step 4 was pretty complicated. Don't worry, step 5 is way less complicated. Step 5 is really showcasing to your prospect who you've helped before, right? This is your testimonials, these are your case studies. Whenever it's time to actually talk through a case study, think about 2 things. One, is this a similar challenge that the prospect I'm talking to right now is trying to solve for. That is a great case study. So always try to find case studies where they're solving for the same problem that your prospect is trying to solve for. If you can't do that, then shift gears into try to find an industry where you'd be able to, or where you've driven like a similar like outcome or solution for a similar client, right? So if you're selling to a security company, find another security company that's a customer of yours and some of the outcomes they're getting, right? It's easier for them to be like, okay, cool, like, some of our competitors are using your product maybe for something different, but hey, we know you're legit. So for the case studies, go through, one that's solving for a similar problem or in the similar space. If you don't have any case studies and you're like net new, this is where you actually start building out some sort of almost like initial understanding of how you're going to help them, right? So for example, I did this when I was doing my consulting business for sales consulting. So during this part where it'd be like, how can we help you? I would actually build out a prospecting plan and a sales playbook, and I would take screenshots of it. So it would say things like, hey, these are the ICP accounts that we'd be targeting on your behalf. These are the buyer personas within the accounts that we think you should go after. This is some of the discovery questions that we want to ask to qualify your deals. And so I would just take screenshots of that and put it in there to show that, hey, like once you sign a contract with us, we can actually move. Yeah, so I wouldn't overcomplicate the, where we've done this in the past slide. I put a video in here because if, sometimes after these meetings, I'll actually send the slides over, and it's a lot more impactful, in my opinion, if, someone watches a video of one of my clients talking about how great it was to work with us. But you can even have this as just like written word or written text. The format I would recommend is talk about the problem the customer had, what parts of your product or service they adopted, and as a result of adopting your product or service, what was the benefits they saw. So very short. Okay, so now we're going into probably one of the most important parts of the entire proposal, which is the pricing. Now, the pricing section is where you're going to get probably the most objections that you're going to get all day. So it's extremely important that you go through this section like very methodically and very thoughtfully, and you get little yeses and agreement from your prospect throughout this section. So I'm going to actually go through a proposal with you on how we do pricing. But the thought process here is I'm going to give you an example for a software deal I did. The reason is most software companies, like from B2B software, like when you're selling software, like you're doing three things. You're selling your software product, right? So this is like licenses, seats, credits, right? You're selling your software. Then you're selling support. So these are different support tiers that you can sell on top of your software. And then you're selling professional services. So consulting to, get people trained on your software, get them onboarded. So I figured if we walked through a software deal, it'd be way more beneficial. Okay, so let's walk through an example software deal. This is very similar to the process that I use to sell enterprise software. So what I like to do is after we've talked about like, hey, this is where you've helped a customer in the past, I'll transition. If you haven't talked to the customer yet about what your pricing model looks like, if it's credits or licenses, I'd have a slide before this. Typically at this point, I've already told them like, hey, we're consumption-based pricing, or we do a per seat licensing model, and I've talked through that. What I'd recommend is like, if you haven't, maybe have a slide before this that goes over like, well, how do you think about pricing your actual software itself? Do not show the price on that slide. Just show exactly what goes into the software pricing. So that's one slide. And then what I'd like to talk about before I talk about any sort of like pricing or anything like that is walking through what makes the offer itself. So I'll start with support. So I'll talk through like, hey, we've got different support tiers. My recommendation is, since this is a mission critical application, to use our business support tier here. So you have 24/7 support. If anything breaks, we'll have someone from our team on the phone with you within an hour, right? And so you talk through like, hey, these are the different options you have. This is my recommendation for support. And then you pause and ask them like, hey, have you guys thought about internally, like what SLAs you have? Like, what are your thoughts on leveraging business support? The goal here is to give them your recommendation and why, and then ask for their feedback on if they agree with that recommendation. Now, the next slide is going to be talking about the value of professional services. So, using consulting, right, there's usually two big ones, but the one is like faster ROI. So, use our team to be able to get to production much faster and make sure you do everything right from day one. So that's going to save you time. You're going to see a faster return on your investment of our product. The second one is going to be internal expertise. So, how quickly can we get your team trained by our experts so they know the best ways to leverage our platform? And then as you continue to grow your team, they'll have all the materials that we document so that they can get onboarded much faster.
So you want to talk about the value of professional services and how that you recommend for any new software purchase or anyone that's using your platform for the first time, they highly recommend professional services to get into production faster and to get their team trained up. And then you can pause here and ask them questions like, hey, have you used a consulting partner before? Like, do you guys have a preferred consulting partner? And then, what are your thoughts on leveraging our professional services team? Here, you want to get affirmation of like, yes, they are interested. And yes, they want to use services, or if they have a partner that they're using, that'll be good for you to know as well. But the idea here is that you want to get some sort of now, after you've talked about support and professional services, let's dive into the next slide, which is going to be consumption forecast. So what I mean by consumption forecast is how many licenses, credits, how much of your product, how much of your support, and how much of your services is the customer going to consume from your company. And so here, I've done this for 3 years. It can be, how many ever periods that's relevant to your business. Obviously, this was a 5-year project, so we did it for 3 years. But really, it shows that, hey, for year one, you're going to purchase 20 licenses, this support tier, this onboarding services package. This is what it's going to support. I scrubbed quite a few of the details. But the idea is that on this slide, you want to showcase that this is how much of our product or service or support you need to be successful in order to solve the challenges that you talked about and get you to your future state. Pro tip here is work with your sales champion if you're presenting this to an executive or the decision maker on fully aligning with the number of licenses and support and services that they need. The reason is the decision maker will have to call out or disagree with their employee, which is much harder to do than for them to disagree with a sales rep or object to a sales rep. So here, what I like to do is I'll present like, hey, for year one, we're looking at 20 licenses, business support and onboarding to really support your launch. In year two, as you continue to scale, we think those 20 licenses will be plenty. Still use business support, but now your team will be onboarded and experts on our platform. And this will really support you being into production on our platform for the next 2 years. And then in year three, right, you're still going to be using 20 licenses, business support, but this is really to set you up for a foundation for continued growth. We don't want you to pay or buy too many licenses up front. So that's why we're going to keep 20 for year three. I worked with, XYZ on your team to actually build out this demand forecast. I'm curious, like, have you guys talked about this internally? Or, if you have someone that you've been working with, you can say like, hey, John, like, what do you think about this forecast, right? Maybe you call in your sales champion to add his thoughts on this consumption forecast slide. But really the goal of this slide after you present it is to get affirmation from the prospect of like, hey, are we aligned on what you think you need in order to be successful? So you're getting an affirmation from them on like the support, the services, and the number of licenses. And one of the key things here that I also like to call out is, hey, typically we do 1 or 3 year deals. What is your preference? Like, what does your organization typically do? We have a lot more flexibility if you do a multi-year deal. I'm curious, like, have you all done 3-year deals in the past? So this is a way for you to also align on how much they want to buy, but also what length of commitment they need to make. So this is a good way to kind of showcase that and then get commitment from them on like, hey, we typically do 1-year deals to start, or, we've explored 3-year deals in the past. That is really important because then you know what level of commitment and contract length you can get from your. So once you've got an alignment on the contract length and then, how much they want to consume from your company over the next year or next couple years, what we need to do next before we show them any sort of commercial offer is to anchor the price. And so what I do on the next slide is take that exact same format and then actually walk through if they did a 1-year deal, what the list price would be, which would be 150K. If they did a 3-year deal and we only charge them list price over the 3 years, this is how much they would pay. And so what we do with this slide is we anchor on the price for the 1-year and the 3-year deal. So for 1 year, right, we've fully aligned with the customer up to this point on what they want to buy, the number of licenses, support, services. And now we've anchored them to 2 options. If they do a 1-year commit with us, right, which, depending on how the previous slide went, maybe that's what they do. We've anchored the price at 150K. If they do a 3-year commit with us, right, if they say like, hey, we typically do 3-year deals for these types of platforms, then we've anchored the price at 500K. And so what we do from here is now that we've anchored the price,
The only variable that the prospect can negotiate with us on is price based on the level of offers that we're going to give them. So from this point on, now we actually transition to the commercial offers, which is going to be a 1 year and a 3 year offer typically. And then the only thing they can do is negotiate. All right, so before we go into step seven is really your commercial offer for your prospect. Let's actually take a quick pause and talk about what we actually accomplished in step six, because I think it's really important. So in step six, what we did is we got a bunch of little yeses from our prospect for everything that makes up our offer. So we got a yes from them on the amount of, our software or product they want to buy. So how many licenses, credits, seats, whatever, however you price. We got a commitment from them on the support tier they want to use, how many consulting hours they want to use, the length of contract they want to sign up for. And then at the very end, we took that and then we anchored on a price, and we anchored on list price so that they know that like, hey, this is going to, cost us, 150K, right? So we've anchored on like a list price based on all the different variables that make up our offer. The reason we do this is if you don't do that and you just go straight to your commercial offer with the discounts and like the better payment terms and all that, what's going to end up happening is your prospect is going to negotiate on every single line item of your proposal or of your offer. What they're going to say is they're going to look at that offer that you give them and say like, hey, what if we do half the licenses? How does that change your price? What if we do the lowest support tier? What if we take PS and consulting out of this? How does it impact price? So what we've done in step six is we've got a full agreement from them on what they want to buy. We've anchored on a price. So when we show them our commercial offer, the only thing they can negotiate on is the price, and that's the only thing that you have to solve for when it comes to the actual commercial offer. Now let's actually break apart like what the commercial offer looks like. Obviously, we have the offer itself, which is what they're committing to buy, and then you want to have a discount. So typically for me, since I'm doing enterprise kind of software platforms, I do a 1 and 3 year proposal. So for the 1 year, I'll show kind of like a lower discount, like maybe 3%. And then I'll show them like the exact demand forecast and kind of what they expected to buy from step six. And then, I'll kind of tee it up by saying like, hey, this is what you would need from us that we validated in step six to be successful to solve these challenges. This is the discount we're giving you. This is the price for year one. And then here are like the payment terms. If you're able to commit to more years with us, we're able to give a higher discount percentage, and then you start teeing up the 3 year proposal and say like, hey, same demand forecast. We want to do like a flat 3 year deal. Here's the higher discount we can give if you commit to more years with us. Here's the payment terms, and this is the investment over the next 3 years. And then you just shut up. Like you just don't say anything after that, and then see what their reaction is in order to figure out how you solve for this. And in this section, right, like the less you talk, the better. Like you want to come in very confident, right? If you're selling, like I had this huge issue where if it was like anything over 100K, like 2 to 3 years ago, I used to get like super nervous about presenting it. You want to say like, hey, this is costing, like, this is what you need to be successful. We're going to give you this discount. This is what it looks like. This is when you owe us the money. And then, if you commit to more years, this is what it looks like. This is the discount we're giving you. This is the price. This is the payment schedule. And then you'll just let the prospect think. All right, so we made it. We made it to the end. We're at step 8, which is what we call the mutual action plan. So the way to think about this, right, is, companies buy software and services very unique to them, like just completely across different industries, like whatever. Like people buy stuff very differently. And usually, depending on what you're selling, whether it's a product or service, you're probably selling it in a very unique way as well. And so what you're trying to do at this part of the proposal is you've aligned on price, you know what they're going to buy, whatever. You're trying to figure out exactly what needs to happen for the deal to close. So what I like to do at this stage is figure out and find a customer specific date. So what I mean by that is, what date does the customer want to be onboarded to your platform or your product? What date do they want to start working with your consulting team, right? Like really attach that date. It could even be like when they want the project to complete, right? Or when they want to be fully onboarded to your like software and have that first use case up and running, right? Find that customer date and then work back from that date to the date of the meeting, to the current date, and figure out all the little steps that's going to take for them to get from today to where they want to be, which is ideally using your product or service or working with your consulting team. So the reason we do that, right, is one, it's a customer date. So, they know that that's an important date and it's much easier to work with that. And as part of that milestones, right, as you work back to the current date, you're going to figure out like when can we actually get the contract done and when can you actually like, give us money. So during this time, like pro tip I always recommend is ask the customer like, hey, realistically, like, you want to be onboarded to our product 3 months from now. Realistically, like when can we finalize contracts and paper, right? Ask the customer first. Like that's a pro tip. Don't assume and don't try to give them a date. Ask them like, hey, realistically, like when can we get contracts and get this deal done? And wait for them to respond. If they come back and say like, oh, we can get this done like tomorrow and that works for you, which it should if it's tomorrow, in that case, then I highly recommend like you just shut up and like figure out what you need to do to get the deal done tomorrow. Now, if they give you a date that's like too late, like they say like, hey, we can get this done like next year, and you're like, dude, I was hoping to get this closed like in 2 months. What you can then do is figure out like, okay, how do we accelerate, the paper process to get you guys onboarded much faster, right? And so that's when you can start doing things like, can we do flexible payment terms? You can say things like we're willing to, trade dollars for days and, accelerate it if we can give you an additional discount. But the idea here is that from today's meeting, what needs to happen for them to be able to complete the contract and get onboarded to your product or service. So document everything, figure out, do they need to do a legal review, a security review, who on their legal team to loop in, who on their security team needs to be a part of this discussion, who on your team, right? If you have security or legal people, they need to review contracts or questionnaires or whatever. But the idea here is that you're leaving this proposal meeting with a roadmap on exactly what are the next steps and the dates and the people attached to those next steps in order for you to get the contract done and get your customer onboarded to your product or service. All right, guys, so that's the video for today. Hopefully it was super valuable. 2 things. I'll put the template to the slides I showed during the video in the description below. And then I'll also put a link to my calendar. If you're struggling with, closing larger deals or want to learn a little bit more about, the best way to, build a proposal for your software company or, your role or your consulting firm, feel free to book time on my calendar. Happy to help out however I can and really figure out if there's something for us to partner on. But outside that, big focus of mine this year is to actually build out more content, both on my website as well as on YouTube. So I'm going to try to get into a weekly kind of posting schedule. So I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video next week. But outside that, have a good day, and I'll see you guys soon. See ya.